Hi students, welcome to week 6 where we're going to be looking at planning and coordinating projects, measuring performance and encouraging compliance. And some of the material that we looked at in week 5 we're going to be discussing further in week 6, such as the PERT system of managing outcomes, and we'll have a look at that in more detail in this lecture. So planning and coordinating projects, we'll go to that first. What I think is really important here overall is that we have a way of managing the outputs and making sure that they are completed on time. And this is a very important part of controlling, which is one of the 4 aspects of management that you find in the course learning outcomes. So project management is what we're really going to be talking about, and what are the project management essentials, or Project Management 101, the essential things you have to understand about project management. Well, you have to understand the project's characteristics, the series of activities that will need to be done. You have to have tasks, and they have to have an objective, a defined time frame, funding limits, and consumption of resources. And it's also important to understand who's going to perform the tasks and whose responsibility it is for the completion of those tasks. So there's processes in project management. The first process is project initiation, and that follows on to project planning, then project execution, project monitoring and control, and then project closure. And I would also ensure that there was a feedback loop, which is essential in project management, to ensure that if there were any mistakes, that they weren't done for a project in the future. So what tools can you use? Well, you'll need a statement of work, a work breakdown structure, a PERT or CPM diagram, a resource leveling software. Gantt charts are useful, which we saw last week, and the human resource matrix will help, in a cost schedule or integration graphs. So what are these elements to important project planning and project management? So on page 131 of your text, you'll find what a statement of work is, and it's a written description of the scope of work required to complete the project. So it has certain elements to it, as the text talks about. It has objectives of the project, brief descriptions of the services to be performed, and the products and documents to be delivered. And I'm just reading from that statement of work in the text on page 131. And you can see it starts down the bottom there. If you go over, you'll see the work breakdown structure, which is tasks and timing. So that's really important to understand exactly who is going to be the responsible person, and how many hours or days or time periods that you're using for your project management are available for that person to complete. And that's on page 132. Then you'll also see the PERT diagram discussed on 134. It talks about a critical path to complete a project, and there are quicker paths than the critical path, and it talks about slack and the necessity of building slack into a system and how to utilize that slack. You can find that on page 135. Resource leveling software. This is important in terms of identifying who has been allocated a task by a certain date, and then that person not being overloaded with additional work so they complete that task on time. And it talks about bottlenecks that you might get in your resource allocation and how to manage those bottlenecks. Gantt charts we had a look at briefly last week, and a Gantt chart is very useful. It's one of the outcomes for assessment 1. You can choose to do a Gantt chart as one of the choices for element 2 of the assessment. Project monitoring and cost schedule integration, they're all discussed up to page 140. So make sure that you read those areas of the text to understand exactly the elements of project planning and project management tools. There's quite a lot of detail there, so I would suggest going over there, but what I've highlighted is the important things for you to understand. So we'll just go through and have a look at a PERT diagram in detail, And you'll see that the critical path there, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's a longer path than perhaps 1, 3, 6, 7, which also delivers the results. What's important there is to understand that if you chose the non-critical path, 1, 3, 6, 7, that there would be slack within the system, and that would allow you to start the project later, or perhaps have deliverables that were required earlier. And in that sense, you are unable to understand what is essential to be completed by what date, and that is the usefulness of the PERT diagram. So that's been discussed, as I said, on page 140, 135, 134 and 135. So have a look at that. It's very, very important. So measuring and monitoring performance and quality, let's have a look at those. So the characteristics of measures for performance and quality involve an objective, it has to be complete, and it has to be responsive. So let's think about the characteristics of measures for a moment. Let's say that your characteristic that you're trying to measure is on-time performance of a bus company. And let's say that the objective is to get 90% on-time performance. So pick up on time, delivery of passengers on the bus on time, and you do that 9 out of 10 times. You've got to have a measure that is complete and takes into account all of the system, or all of the system that you're trying to measure for on-time performance. And it has to be responsive and be able to be acted on by management so that changes can be made to improve on-time performance. So hierarchy of measures, you have good measures, better measures, and best measures. Exact outcome measures are often considered best. They provide an actual quantitative measurement, or a measurement of the outcomes, and that's really important. So if we were looking at our on-time pickup of bus performance, then exact outcome measures would be considered best in this example, because it would give a sequence of weightings over time, or outcomes over time, that sort of said we're improving our performance, or our performance is deteriorating. So that is very, very helpful. It would be considered a best hierarchy of measures. There can be proxy measures of outcomes, maybe perhaps a survey snapshot done each month of the year to see how much on-time performance has increased or decreased from the previous year. Then there are process measures of outputs, activities, and inputs to the system. So inputs to the system might be increased scheduling or timetabling, activities that bus drivers can do such that they perhaps reduce breaks until the end of passengers being delivered, and initiate progress measures. Initiative progress measures, where these are short-term and generally they don't provide a link over time. So we need to have a look beyond shareholder returns and have a look at the management environment in which we're working in. Human rights is important, so if we make decisions about when bus drivers have breaks, we need to take into account that whether this has any human rights implications. Has the bus driver been working for, say, 8 hours and they've not had a break? Is that a good thing to do? Is that violating of any human rights? Social justice is important to consider. How we pick up people in certain areas of our network and how we pick up people in other areas of the network in the bus company is important. Community involvement, can we get the community involved in what measures they would like to see? And are we considering all elements of animal protection and making sure that if animals are involved, we have they have a say in how they're transported. If you, say, are a beef producing company and you transport cattle to an abattoir to produce beef, then you must consider how they're transported and how they're treated during that transport. Do they need breaks? Do they need watering? Do they need to come off trucks and be reloaded at any stage? How long is that journey going to be? Government has measures for these, and it's important that stakeholders in the beef industry are aware that animals have rights in this particular area, and it's important to be aware of those measures that measure performance and how animals are treated within a system. So approaches to improving performance, you can have the Baldrige criteria, TQM, Six Sigma, Kaizen, or ICO 9000. At this point here, I'd like you to hear from another lecturer in the School of Business and Law, Dr. Olive Merlich, who produced a slide for us so that you have another person who has a view on management and you're not just all hearing it from me in these slides. So I'd like you to watch the video, which you'll find below here, and that will be very helpful for you to integrate into this slideshow presentation at this stage. So I hope you enjoyed that presentation. It was a short presentation, but very, very useful to understand performance and measures and how outcomes are tracked for management. Encouraging and enabling compliance with the system is important, and we're about to move on to that next. But approaches to improving performance. If we look at ISO 9000, this is a strategy to improve quality outcomes within a system, and it might suggest ways that best practice is performed in management. And ISO 9000 is a group of performance measures that can be utilized throughout management in business to produce those best practice outcomes. Total quality management, TQM, is very popular at the moment, something that businesses use to make sure that there is a quality output at the end. The other criteria or the other approaches to improving performance you can read within the textbook. So let's have a look at encouraging and enabling compliance. So how do we get people to stop bad behaviour? How do we warn them about dangers? And how do we ensure that they're aware of outcomes which might be compromised by certain activities? So let's have a look at individual non-compliance. A number of reasons for non-compliance are listed below in this slide, from I didn't know, I wasn't sure, I had to look out for myself, they had it coming, it was the right thing to do. These are written as if they are mentioned responses to non-compliance of a particular system. So if someone said, well, I didn't know that was part of the compliance system, that can be a result of poor communication by management or ambiguity in the outcomes, and that's really important that those things are addressed, and that if someone says I didn't know, we don't immediately blame it on them. We look at the management systems that are in place to make sure that they should have known. Perhaps there's a training program, perhaps they sign when they understand the training outcomes. That will alleviate any poor communication or ambiguity in how we do things around here. Perhaps there's a case where people say I wasn't sure, and that can be again down to ambiguity, mixed signal, social pressure. So to make sure that we're all on the same page, a training program where someone signs to make sure that they've understood the training outputs, that could eliminate any ambiguity, any mixed signals. This is what you're to follow. There could be a Q&A session where people say, well, I've been told this in the past, and that will clear up any ambiguity or misunderstanding about what is the correct procedure to follow to encourage compliance with our systems. Reward structures can be really, really helpful in making sure that people know what is required and how to complete those tasks. If people have a negative attitude towards management, they may sabotage systems. They may put this down to unfair rules or violations of trust by management, which is developed with their negative attitudes towards management. It's very important that those people are counselled. Those people understand that the reason that we're doing compliance with our systems and the way that we encourage people to behave and act in the workplace is ultimately about their safety. They might have conflicting values about the system, and they don't believe that the process that's been set down by management is ethical or fair, so they choose a different path. We need to understand and talk with them about why they felt that way, and maybe there's even an opportunity for the system to be changed. So strategies for encouraging compliance, you can have punitive generative, preventative, cognitive, ruminative, which is carrots, and normative, which is conversion. All pretty much explanatory. Punitive is a stick, generative is fast tracks, preventative hurdles, cognitive enlightenment, carrots for remunerative, to encourage people to comply, and normative conversion, all discussed in the textbook. Costs and paradoxes. There's direct and indirect financial costs, reduced compliance, missed opportunities, and destructive deviance. So again, there's a number of paradoxes that are involved in management. Sometimes it might be too costly to give everyone a $50 bonus if there is no near misses in the workplace for some time. No one had a near miss or an accident. That might be too costly to encourage performance that way, and you have to go back to another system. One of the things that's highlighted that I'd like to highlight here is organisational compliance, how conforming to a set of standards is quite ideal in an organisation, and the federal sentencing guidelines that the US has developed tries to bring a meaningful compliance program to how sentences are provided in a certain system, and that's been very successful. So key organisational guidelines for compliance and ethics programs. Well, oversight by high-level personnel is required. Due care in delegating substantial discretionary authority is important. Effective communication to all levels of employees. Systems for monitoring, auditing and reporting suspected wrongdoing without fear of reprisal. Consistent enforcement and compliance standards, including disciplinary mechanisms and reasonable steps to respond to and prevent further similar offences upon detection of a violation. All important aspects of encouraging organisational compliance with ethical programs. Okay, I have been fielding a lot of calls from students about Assessment 1, so keep those coming. If you've got any questions, add them on the forum or not text me, but email me, and I'm happy to get back to you. All right, take care, have a good week. All right, bye.